That's pretty cool. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, everybody. It's your host of Freedom to Fight, and Anira Mathis. I have another wonderful guest on my show today. Brian Sachetta is the author of a book series called Get Out of Your Head. We have a lot in common as far as our mental health interests and pursuits. As somebody that has struggled with anxiety and depression throughout his life, he's developed a program to connect with people and help them heal. And I'm really excited to hear all about it.
The book is more focused on helping folks manage depression. And there's a narrative in there, sort of a symbolic or thematic narrative of sailing and, sort of this metaphor as if we are sailing our ships across the ocean of life. And occasionally these whirlpools in the ocean will open up. And those are symbolically what I would refer to as depression, right? And they try to pull us down into the abyss. And so that book is called Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression.
So I received my master's in professional counseling psychology. It's the same difference. I don't think that we have done a good job of kind of empowering people to do that. Like, it's important to have the clinical training and what that can provide to healing trauma and things of that sort. However, we're all human beings, professionals, practitioners are human beings. And so we bring that to the table as well. And so that can sometimes create obstacles in how we're connecting and healing others. So we need people that have all different kinds of experiences, and self-disclosure is imperative.
To our listening, right? It's like, know that is out there, and not to stop looking for it, right? Kind of to what you said earlier, is if you haven't found it yet, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Not saying it's going to be easy, right? It's like, to another point of sort of nuance, right? Is therapy can be expensive. It can be inaccessible. And so for a lot of folks, it's going to be challenging. At the same time, there are resources out there, and I hope that folks don't lose hope along the way.
Because we have pursued it that way, because we've said, oh, just take this pill. It's fine. Just take this and you'll heal. And instead of teaching people about this is how your brain will react if you had these certain experiences. You had trauma, your brain's going to be wired to experience trauma, and you might get yourself into relationships that you weren't unknowingly getting into that are triggering you in these same ways. What is that all about? Let's teach people about their psychology, about our makeup.
Sure. Thanks, Senora. Pleasure to be here. You summed it up, but I guess I'll just kind of say it again, right? So I'm Brian Sachetta, owner and author of Get Out of Your Head, which is both a brand and a book series that seeks to help folks overcome anxiety and depression. We can obviously dive more into the story. For now, I'll just say, right, I'm somebody probably like the listener, right, who has dealt with anxiety, depression, different mental health related issues throughout his life. And as I went through those issues, I tried to find ways to cope with them. And then eventually, because, the battle for my own mental health was so important to me, and I saw what it does to other people, and that really resonates with me, I was like, hey, I want to share this information in hopes of helping accelerate their own healing journey.
That's really beautiful. I mean, not everybody's going to go to school and go on the 7 or 10-year track to become a practitioner, and even when you do that, there's so many obstacles to help people. We need people that are doing alternative routes to connect with others. So yeah, it's awesome to talk to you. And I want to know, so Get Out of Your Head, is it like an instructional, or tell me all about it?
Yeah, I usually classify the books, right, as something of a combination of self-help and memoir. So, not that self-help books don't have personal stories in them normally, but I do tend to lean into that methodology or that sort of form of writing a little bit. And the thought process there for me is, you know, I want to make sure that the reader picks up my book and says, "Hey, this guy gets it. This guy understands what I'm going through because he just explained how he went through something similar himself." And one of the things, right, is like you had mentioned, I am not a clinician. I'm not clinically trained or anything like that. So I have to find, I guess, validation or credibility in any way that I can. And for me, that credibility comes through being able to say to my audience, "Hey, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I have been through a lot of the same things that you have. And for that reason, I think we can at least have a fruitful conversation."
Certainly. And I don't think that professionals convey this, mental health professionals convey this point enough. Me being a trauma therapist, I've received my master's in professional counseling psychology. It's the same difference. I don't think that we have done a good job of kind of empowering people to do that. Like, it's important to have the clinical training and what that can provide to healing trauma and things of that sort. However, we're all human beings, you know. Professionals, practitioners are human beings, and so we bring that to the table as well. And so that can sometimes create obstacles in how we're connecting and healing others. So we need people that are not um, we need people that have all different kinds of experiences. And self-disclosure is an imperative in therapy. So me sharing my personal trauma stories with my clients is part of healing. So yeah, it's very important.
Yeah, that's super cool. And I will say, right, I totally understand, and we will talk more about it at the end as we get into questions around like, hey, what does maybe the industry get wrong at this current moment? But it is not my like. I certainly am not trying to be combative with like I'm trying to fit into the industry, right? And I understand that one of the risks or the difficulties is that if somebody, let's just say somebody who is not licensed or trained or whatever, if they come in and they sell merchandise or a coaching practice or a seminar or a book or whatever, and there is bad information in there, we're obviously dealing with folks who are in fragile places, right? And if we say the wrong things, there can be a lot of liability there. And so I think that the difficulty is you just want to make sure that like you're helping as much as you can and not doing harm,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure. But it just is as a that responsibility falls on everybody is what I'm trying to say. Is like we're not professionals. We're not just like we're not we're human beings. We're not perfect. We're going to allow our egos to the ego's not terrible. I'm not bashing the egos. I really mean just kind of allowing some of like our insecurities or things like that to kind of lead the way, and then we'll fall into that trap and provide some misinformation. We're human beings. So everybody has that responsibility. But I do think that yeah, people like you should be more empowered to speak up about their experiences, and hopefully it'll help people. Yeah. That's the goal. Let me ask you, Brian, so the picture behind you is the cover of your book. Oh, is this your logo, or is this also the book cover? One of the book covers?
Yeah, so it's both the logo of the brand and the first book cover. I've been as a I guess I would call myself something of a entrepreneur, if not like an authorpreneur. That term gets thrown around sometimes these days. Trying to figure out ways to optimize sales and all that. And I think with my second book, what I've seen is I was very connected. So the second book is more focused on helping folks manage depression. And there's a narrative in there, sort of a symbolic or thematic narrative around. I'll dive into it a tiny bit, but it's around sailing and sort of this metaphor as if like we are sailing our ships across the ocean of life, and occasionally these whirlpools in the ocean will open up, and those are symbolically what I would refer to as depression, right? And they try to pull us down into the abyss. And so that book is called Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression. With that second cover, I was so into the theme and the symbolism and all that that the cover shows a ship being pulled into one of these maelstroms, if you will. Um, what I think I have found, and it's been a few years now, right? Obviously, it's hard to say because you have to do your own marketing and see what resonates with folks. It's not always easy to glean all of that information one to one and be like, that's totally right or that's totally wrong. But I think my gut is starting to tell me that folks get to that book and are like, I don't know what it's about based on the cover. Is this a a Long John Silver kind of story, or is this something else? So long story short is I think in the future I will be putting the logo behind me on the second book cover and just trying to make the brand more cohesive. The logo itself is. I was actually talking to a couple friends this weekend who had asked me about it because I hadn't talked to them about it before. And they were like, "Oh, what's the logo? Why the snake thing?" And I was like, "Oh, well, there's also a brain in there, right?" And so
Yeah.
there's more symbolism in this one too, which is basically trying to evoke different emotions and narratives and all that, and basically saying with this identity, right, is your mind can be like a snake and it can coil around you and it can make you feel trapped. And so the idea is we almost have to tame that beast in our minds, right? And allow ourselves to get out of our head more frequently so that we can experience less anxiety and
Sure,
depression.
sure. I agree with you. So that the snake, there's also a brain in this logo and this representation. Yeah. So that this top part is the brain. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And for folks who are listening but don't have the video feed, it will be hard to visualize this, but hopefully you might. Yeah, it's basically a snake face with the top of the head looking kind of like a brain with
They don't
folds in it.
they don't get a description. You have to look at I'm recording a video. I'll be editing this. I'll be spending a lot of time. You better watch the video. It'll be on YouTube. It's on Spotify. It's on where you can watch videos. So go watch the video. But yeah, it's a great representation. I have a lot of interest in neuroscience and so the brain. And I mean, being a trauma therapist, I'm really focusing on brain function and teaching my clients and the public about that. So I do think that that's great. It's a way to connect the two, like our reptilian brain. I think is what you're referring to. There's different parts of our brain, but that's generally referred to as our subconscious mind, subconscious part of our brain. So yeah, that's awesome. Um, I think that you're doing an excellent job, by the way. I think that there's, at least for me, from my perspective of being a, I guess, content creator and podcast host and all the marketing and stuff that goes along with that. It's been nice to kind of figure out what my local logos say. And my first logo is a photo of me, but not my head, just my body. And I'm holding my jujitsu belt, my Brazilian jujitsu belt, and I have a glove on, which is what we wear underneath the mitts you wear underneath your boxing gloves. So I had both of that in the picture, and that just kind of kept evolving. But I'm glad that I kept experimenting. That it wasn't just, oh, I have to do it this way. Like there's no one right way to do it. It's really trying to find connection.
Definitely, and there is, obviously the name of the podcast is Freedom to Fight. We could dive into it a little bit more later, but I went to a boxing gym for many years, one in South Boston, and they had a similar kind of like gutsy. It was like it was called Everybody Fights, and their whole thing was like in life you have to fight, right? You have to find something that is worth fighting for, and then you have to dive into it and really put your best effort behind it. So that is a cool like sort of call to action, if you will. And I think it resonates well with the message that you're trying to put forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I we'll talk a lot about my history, but I found martial arts because of my own trauma and knowing science literature says that martial arts helps to heal trauma. I wanted to experiment, and see if it would work for me, and it really did. Like it's really effective, but prior wasn't kind of giving myself that freedom to explore things that I don't know are slightly it's a combative sport, and some of the things that I practice, it's I went to an MMA gym when I started and I didn't realize that's what it was, but yeah, fighting like in a cage or it's not something I would have pursued before. It's not something I would have given myself permission to pursue before. So yeah, freedom to fight. resonate.
For sure. And I really hope that you don't take this the wrong way. You have a bubbly, like light personality, right? And then I can just imagine you being like sort of not tricking in a bad way, but like people go to the gym, they might be like, "Oh, I could take her. She's too lighthearted," and then you could just be a
Oh,
demon in the
it's
ring.
so fun. I think that everybody should kind of have this qualities balanced, of course, but uh that's the funnest part about it is that nobody really knows my skill level and I just joined a new gym about a month ago. So everybody's trying to fill me out and I'll roll with a different you know what I mean? Like it takes a while to really get to know someone, but it makes me feel more confident that people are maybe kind of underestimating me until they see that I do have this skill set. So, um, I don't take any offense. I aim to be this way. I want to be this way because it helps me to connect with people. So, uh, yeah, yeah.
Or
Okay, so let me ask more about your book series, and then we can move on to your journey and mental. I mean, we could intertwine the two. I haven't looked inside your books. I don't know. How can I find your books? That's what I should add.
Sure. Yeah. Best place to go would be getoutofyourhead.com. So that's my personal website. There's links to the books there. I tend to send folks there just because it's all in one place. You could go onto Amazon and look for my books as well. There, unfortunately, is another book with the same title that is really popular. So sometimes that gets confusing. So I will often either say, type in Brian Sachetta or go to getoutofyourhead.com. Not that you wouldn't be able to find it, right? There's the snarling snake, and you should be able to see the difference between that and a different book. But it does happen. Folks are like, "Hey, like I couldn't find you. Like it took me forever, and then you were on the second page or whatever." So just trying to get folks the books that they're
Sure.
looking
I
for.
think
So
it's also it speaks uh loudly, I think, to have a website and to have people find you there. I need to finish creating mine, by the way, but I think that's a bit better to like get to know you and know what they're purchasing, know what they're getting involved in. Are you planning on doing any audiobooks? Are you planning on recording your books on audio?
so fun question. I both of my books had
Oh,
audiobook
okay.
companions. The first one, I mean, if we have time for a story, I recorded the first one myself because I wanted to save some money and also, like, I wanted to put my own voice behind the book, and so I didn't have a recording studio, and I learned a lot of things as I was recording this book in early 2019. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend it unless you're very passionate about getting behind a microphone and really dialing in. Like you get to the point where it's more perfecting individual sentences than it is just sitting down
Yeah.
and talking because you start as you listen more closely, right? You hear the ticks and the pops and all that in your delivery, and you're like, oh, I don't want that. I can't have that, whatever it may be. So my parents live close enough to me, and they have a walk-in closet at their house upstairs, and so what I would do was when they weren't home, I mean, this was above board, they knew about it, but just because I didn't want the background noise, when they weren't home, I would go record in this walk-in closet, and I'd have, clothes hanging around me to dull the echo and all that. And one of the difficulties is one, I was trying to have it so that people weren't home, and then two, yeah, just I didn't do the audio engineering of that first book. I had a friend help me out with that, and I just at the time, and maybe I probably still wouldn't know everything, but at the time I was a novice, right? And I would send the files over to my engineer, and then we would sort of master them. And as we mastered them, different sounds would come out that weren't present in my own recordings. And then it was like I had to go back and do it again. So it was painstaking. For the second book, I just hired somebody to do it themselves, and it was much faster. The turnaround time was like a couple weeks rather than me fiddling for months, and that was just nice, right? It was like I was in a place where I could pay a couple grand to just get it done. But so if folks want to listen to the books, that is an option for them right now. One thing that is funny is, it might be different because I'm on a mic right now, and that might sound like my own recording of the first book. But I have had friends download my first book and be like, "This isn't even you. like, you didn't record this because, you have a different voice on the microphone and then you master it and all that. And as you're narrating, you're going very slowly. So just
Yeah, it's nice to learn things, just to have the experience. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of not so nice things in that process. Like I've edited episodes that were just a monster. Like it's like days on days on days trying to get certain audio tracks to align and fixing things like popping noises and all. Like I learned a lot. I don't have a background in technology. Like I'm just learning as I go, and I think that's um like a it's an imperative experience to have and a creative expression because you get to know yourself. You get to know your limits.
oh,
And
oh, you sure do. I remember we got to a point where, like, I was working a lot, like, going to an office, so I couldn't even go to my parents' house when they weren't there. So I would go to their house at midnight, and I would record from 12 to 6 while they were sleeping, and then I'd get in bed, and I'm like, I'm so tired." I basically was just nocturnal, but sometimes you care so much that you're willing to put in that work.
everybody, hi audience. I think everybody should pursue uh, something that would make them do that. Something that would challenge you that much. I've stayed up till I've edited episodes and then like looked outside and the sun's up and I'm like, oh okay, it's a new day. Like sitting in the same chair, falling asleep while I'm like typing on my laptop while I'm in bed. Like I think that as painful as that is, it's so rewarding when you get to the other end of things. It's like, I earned this. I put in all of the blood, sweat, and tears. Like, this is my finished project, this is my finished product. Like, I I'm really proud of my show because of that. I could probably hire some people. It'd probably make my life a lot easier, but I don't know if that's where I'll take my show. Like because like you were saying in investing like all of that, I don't know. The second book you mentioned is a different voice. It's a different person speaking and not you. Yeah, yeah, okay. Okay.
It is, yeah.
Well, I I don't know. I guess it just is a matter of perspective. I think it's rewarding for me to do it on my own, but I'm sure that there is a lot of pros with just hiring someone as well.
Yeah, and you'll figure it out, right? You kind of weigh the pros and cons and all that. And I do think to myself, I'm like, hey, if somebody bought both of my books and they went from one narrator to the other, they might not like that at first. So it's trade offs. That's kind of life,
For
I
sure.
guess.
So I'm curious how many books will be in the series, or is that undecided?
It's probably undecided at the moment. One of the difficulties, right, and I'm sure you could relate to this, is just, you have your full-time job, even if it's in the mental health space, but then the content creation sort of comes
Mhm.
on the side. And when you think about just how much you have to do, the average person, right, it's like work and friends and family life, socializing. Maybe, you own a home or you sit on a condo board and there's a lot of work involved there. Maybe you donate your time, volunteer, whatever it may be. Very quickly as you get older, I think, and you have more commitments, you start you start to realize that the number of hours that you could commit to, I wouldn't even necessarily say a side project, but just something in addition to a 40-hour work week, it wears on you, and it's like you can do it for a while, but can you do it for a decade and raise kids? I'm not sure. So it can be a lot of
For
work.
sure. And it'll take time off of your life. Like I can't say years because it depends on the time frame, but you really feel it, you really feel all of the work that it requires, the energy that it requires. Um Brian, do you have children? You
I
don't?
do not have children. My brother has 2, and, I watch them from time to time, and it's very fun to do that, but I see how much work it is for my brother and his wife, and I'm like, I would like to have kids, but I also would like to be in a better spot
Sure.
in my life where I am settled of, like, um, like, I think in my head, I have to be like, either the book stuff, I'm gonna leave it where it is and I'll continue to help people, but I need to not spend as much time on it. And I need to put food on the table through a normal job, or I try to make the writing more of a full-time thing because it's almost like I've had two jobs for close to a decade now, and a lot of people do. So I'm not saying I'm the only one. I empathize with it's a tough world out there, especially with inflation and everything going on, housing prices and all that. But after a long time, you're like, hey, I might have to pick, and especially if you're like, hey, I want to have kids. So that's where my mind is at
Oh,
right
and
now.
I think it's fun how people answer this question because, like, I think that's a fair answer. Like, it's desirable to some degree, but like practically, we live in the United States right now, and everything is so expensive. It's impractical to make that decision for some people. But I do think it's funny that a lot of people are like, but I loved it. Like, they would have to convey that. I don't think it's just black and white or black or white. Like, you want kids and it looks like this, or you don't want kids and you hate them. It's like, no, there's a lot of in between. There's a lot of reasons why not to pursue that. And I think that's a really important one because people don't do that and then they struggle and their children struggle and it sucks. It's not a good experience. And I asked you if you had children because yeah, I think this would be I don't have children either. I think this would be impossible to do if I also had even as a one kid. I have a dog and I cook for her. I cook all her meals. So the meal prep, the grocery shopping, the meal prep, the heating up, like all of that takes time. It's like taking care of a child. If I had a human being here, like, no, I wouldn't be this cheering. I'd be angry. I'd be tired. I'd be more tired. And it would compromise the quality of my work. It's just hard to balance those two. So, um, okay, so moving on, I'd like to know more about your life, what led you down this path of wanting to talk to people and yeah, all the nitty-gritty of the mental health aspect of it.
Definitely. I can kind of just jump in, and if you want to pause at any point and ask questions, feel
Sure,
free to do.
sure.
All right. Yeah, so my journey into all this stuff really began in earnest when I was 17. So I was 17 years old. I was on a date with a girl that I was interested in. Like we weren't dating, but we were on a date. And I did not have a lot of experience in the relationship department. And at least at the time, I was like, hey, I really like this girl and I want to see where it goes. I hope it goes to the places that I want it to. And because I didn't have a lot of experience, and I didn't know anything about my own mind. I knew that I dealt with nervousness, or I felt nervous from time to time, but I was like, hey, everybody does. And so I'm on this date with this girl, and I remember we had gone out a few times, and I was thinking to myself, like, hey, she was acting a little distant. How do I broach that subject? Whatever, right? And I was just very anxious or very nervous. I honestly didn't even know the word anxiety at the time, or didn't have it in my vocabulary, right? And so I was like, oh, I want to ask her kind of what the deal is with us, but I don't know what to say. And now I'm nervous. And now my heart is racing. And I just was thinking myself into a lot of fear. And the next thing I know, I'm having a panic attack, being like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so nervous. What if she breaks up with me or whatever? And so I'm sitting there and I was like, okay, like figure out a way. I don't know exactly what this is. I just know I'm really, really nervous. And I said to myself, like, I got to figure out a way to calm this down, to get this to go away a little bit. So I just sat there and I sort of prayed. I sort of breathed, took some deep breaths. I was like, I don't know what this is, but hopefully it'll go away. And in about 5 minutes, we had been watching a movie. So luckily I had a little bit of cover. And so after 5 minutes, I was like, okay, I'm going to start the conversation. And I was an awkward young kid. I didn't really broach the subject very well. I just kind of blurted out. I was like, "Hey, what's the deal with us? What's going on? Whatever." And she was like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 what's going on here? Whatever." And she feels me like my heart racing, because I'm sitting next to her, and she's like, "Whoa, what is going on with you?" And so we were talking just a little bit for a minute or two, and meanwhile, like I'm still kind of in the grips of a panic attack. I have no idea what I'm doing, and she eventually got to the point where she was like, well, I've been seeing this guy out of town. It's getting serious. I don't know if you and I should really see each other anymore. And then she's like, and really, what is up with you? Like, you're like convulsing, you know? And I was just so humiliated. I was clearly going through like an anxiety attack or a panic attack, and I just didn't know anything about it. I didn't know how to deal with it. Again, I was just trying to white knuckle it and get on by. And so essentially, like, we sort of, I don't know what the right, shook hands, and she eventually she went home shortly thereafter. And then I was like, don't know what that was. Obviously I need to do something about it, but it was just too much to fathom right now to really go down that path. And then so 6 months later, basically had another one of those episodes, and I wake up the next day and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, I had been fearing that that would happen again, and it did, on another date with a different girl, and or at least, hanging out with a girl. And I wake up and I'm like, hey, that really stunk. That was really painful. That's now two of these events in a row. I have no idea what this is. I just know that I get nervous. And this is an important area of my life, being relationships, where I'm like, if I don't figure this out to some degree, it's going to continually hold me back. And I don't want to be held back. So that was really like the entry point into me figuring out, or just starting to ask questions of like, what is this and how do I proceed? And so that was getting on the path, if you will, of learning to manage my own anxiety and first coming to understand what that even was. And it was, a 10-year path, and there was depression in there as well. And I'm certainly not saying that I never deal with these things anymore. But I've certainly developed some coping mechanisms that have helped me along the way. And that's why I felt like at a certain point I could turn around and share what I had learned with other folks. And it wasn't like, hey, I'm pretending to know everything when I really don't. I was like, I actually feel like I've made some progress here, and that's why I want to share it
Yeah,
with
yeah.
folks.
Well, thank you for sharing the stories. I mean, I can imagine being in those scenarios. I'm a socially anxious person in general. Like I just kind of present that way, but so I can relate. Like I've been in scenarios where I just panic attacks and not really knowing what's happening, and it feels like a heart attack in some cases. You're frozen in that space, and so I want to talk to you about healing that, or what to do it when you're having a panic attack here in a bit. But yeah, so I'm curious. You brought up one important thing about anxiety and depression. Like, it's not, a lot of people have the assumption it's something to overcome. Like, I should never be anxious. I should never be depressed, and I that's a misconception. So, because you mentioned, like, it's been 10 years. Like, I still deal with it, of course, because it's here. So I want to talk about that aspect, and then we could kind of move on and get some of my opinions, but I wanna see what your opinion is about this aspect.
Yeah, it's a great topic to bring up, right? Sort of the overall ethos here is like normalizing these things, right? And understanding, like, so when you're 17 years old, you don't have perspective on the world. And not like, I'm not saying I have full perspective now, but I at least have worked with a lot of people to know, and read the statistics and journal articles and whatnot, to know that a lot of people are afflicted by these conditions. I also know that if you run the tape back through the course of human history and you look at evolutionary psychology and whatnot, there are valid reasons and bases for anxiety and depression arising in the body, right? And so when you get more of that information, and you're able to say to yourself, like, hey, the body acts in a certain way when it encounters certain stimulus or stimuli or whatever it is, right? Or, hey, everybody encounters these sorts of things to a degree, and here are the things that we do in our own minds to amplify that misery, right? You start to normalize it a little bit for yourself. And the great thing about that is, right, so like, if I go back again to like being 18, it was like the minute that feeling came on of anxiety, the doom loop started going. It was like, oh no, I'm not even supposed to feel this way. I'm so frustrated again that this is coming on. Man, I'm trapped right now, right? Whereas now, when I to the point of the question that you asked, it's like, nobody likes to feel anxiety. However, once you familiarize yourself with it a little bit, and you understand that feeling, you can sort of develop a pattern recognition system in you to be like, okay, that feeling is here again. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to go horrifically here. It doesn't mean I'm in trouble. It means that maybe my body is preparing to do something it doesn't normally do, or maybe it's preparing for a perceived threat, in my environment or whatever it is. And if you're able to talk to yourself in a more grounded fashion rather than jumping into catastrophizing, right? You stop all the chain reactions in your mind and body that then perpetuate your anxiety related
Yeah,
symptoms.
yeah. That's really well said. I think that that's really what people are trying to achieve now. It's like what do I use in real time? How do I gain some more control over myself? And yes, I did quotes for a reason because uh, how we identify, what we identify with really does kind of navigate this relationship with anxiety. Like if we're relating to those spots as our own, then it's really hard to separate. Like, how do you ground when it's almost like you're compromising your identity? If you identify with being anxious, it's like you're compromising your identity just to find some grounding. And it's like, um, yeah, we could talk more about that here in a bit, but I want to know what your philosophy is on um, healing anxiety and depression. Like, do you have it's a self help book, but do you have steps? Like, do you have any acronyms or anything that my audience can take from today?
Yeah, I don't have any
Okay.
acronyms. I do have steps, that's for sure. Um, the book is sort of broken out into like high level and low level, as in, okay, low level is you are already anxious or you are preparing for some scenario that you know is going to make you anxious. So that fear is building in your body. That low level section is meant to say, hey, once those feelings arise or are coming on, here are the steps that you can walk through to mitigate those feelings. The high level, which I think is actually just as important, if not more important. And I maybe I just say that because of some recent things in my own life, but both of them are really important. The high level is more how are you building your life and constructing your habits, and sort of just generally like how do you live your life in a way like does the way that you live your life and the habits within it lead to more stress and thus more anxiety or more depression, or are you living a stress-free lifestyle, a carefree lifestyle that leads you to more positive feelings and helps you keep anxiety or depression at bay a little bit more often? So, in terms of steps, right? I think why don't I dive into a couple steps just so we have something tangible to talk about? This sort of the I talk about this a lot on podcasts, but it's like it's fundamental to the subject. And I talked about it a second ago when I was describing that panic attack that I went through. And I had no idea what I was doing. Just I had said, right, I was on the couch and I was praying and I was like, please just make this go away. And I was breathing. And so I have this framework in my first book called the 10 steps to getting out of your head. So that relates well to what I was saying in terms of you are in the fear, and how do you get out of that fear, right? How do you mitigate the feelings that are holding you back? So the first step on that list is to breathe. And it's not like it is glaringly obvious for most folks, and it's not meant to be flippant of like, hey, you just got to breathe, like most people would probably be like, I know, right? But it's why it's so interesting, right? So I mentioned very briefly like evolutionary psychology and the body and all that, right? And so when you start looking into some basic scientific explanations for anxiety, right? You come to learn about the nervous system, and you see the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight nervous system, or the acute stress response. They're all kind of tied up into a similar package there, right? And all of those things are what activate when there is a stressor or a danger in our environment, right? When we are threatened, the fight or flight nervous system kicks into action. And that system is designed, right, to get us out of that threat. And so the interesting thing is when you are faced with one of those perils, if you're standing in front of a lion, right, certain parts of your brain turn off, like the deep thinking part of your brain turns off because there's no time to be like, hey, what's this lion's name and what's his favorite color and are we going to be friends? It's like that dude is about to eat me and I got to get out of here as fast as I can, right? So when obviously we don't encounter too many real life lions yet, our sympathetic nervous systems are maybe not always, but often revving up. And so when that happens, not only do we find ourselves not breathing so much, but we also, as a product of, those parts of our brains turning off, we find ourselves without the critical thinking skills necessary to help us sort of get ourselves out of the fear that we're facing. So the reason that step one is to breathe, and again, I know it sounds really simple and all that, but it's to say, hey, when you do some deep breathing, you actually activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is sort of the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. And it is also called the rest and digest or feed and breed system. And so you could think of it as like once that system becomes activated, the parts of your brain that are required for deep thinking come back online, right? And so why that's important is to be able to say, right, often when we get really stressed out and really freaked out by some stimulus in our environment, we might blow it out of proportion, right? Maybe we have a math test. And even though that math test is really important to us, our brains convince us that if we fail this math test, we are literally going to die, right? And so when we do that breathing and reconnect to the parts of our brains that help us do that slightly more analytical thinking, we can then say, okay, I know I'm scared. I know this test is important, but that voice in my head saying that if I get a 50 out of 100 on this test, that voice saying I will be dead, it's not true, right? And then now that I have that wherewithal and that perspective, let me walk through these other steps that help me combat the fear even further.
Yeah. I have so much to say about this. You have to excuse me. She's scratching at the door. I hope you can hear it. Hold it just.
Cool.
Hi. Thanks for being patient. No, well, yeah, beautifully said. I'm glad that you have some knowledge around the central nervous system and how to articulate what's happening. So, yeah, great perspective. And I want to just I don't know, give some perspective on that as well. So here's something that you said, yeah, in your example of the exam of somebody thinking if I get a 50 out of 100, I'll literally die. And um, I don't want to invalidate that. That's really why I'm bringing this up because our minds and our brains, I see as separate concepts. And I think that hmm, from somebody that, because I'm a trauma therapist, from somebody that has experienced trauma, which is most people, yes, trauma is subjective, but I think that there's a lot of validity in that fear that if I score 50 out of 100, I might die. Well, there might be some legitimacy to that. Like, what if that child goes home and they get reprimanded for scoring that low? I think that I don't want to dismiss these thoughts that people have or minimize them as well. We just need to reduce because I think that that's then silencing the fact that the anxiety should maybe be there, if that makes sense. Like there is some room
Yeah.
for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because there's
Mhm.
always nuance, right? Where it's like my examples are more meant to be geared toward like in a vacuum. You have a decent life. You're thinking about getting a bad score on an exam, and you feel as though that score just because maybe you want to go to a certain school or certain college, or you want to get certain grades, right? Just the end product, and not like unfortunately, right, it's like that's the difficulty of writing a book is there is so many folks that you could reach and your message it's hard to speak specifically to
Well, for sure.
everybody's certain situation. So you are certainly right where like if somebody is facing, abuse at home because of a certain grade, we are
Sure,
definitely
sure.
not
And
invalidating
I
that.
don't wanna
More just an example of kind of just everyday life that people go through, and we all worry from time
yeah,
to time.
yeah. So the reason why I'm saying this, of course, because I'm a trauma therapist, but not because I think that that's a rarity. I think that's more of the general experience of humanity, at least in the United States. I can't say it about other countries. I think that most people are coming from that perspective. And so the anxiety, although it may look like that child has everything they need, the anxiety is the indication that they don't. So even if that child is not in an abusive environment, so to speak, abusive in the way that they'll be physically abused if they score low, it might be the absence of emotional support and emotional connection. Do you know what I mean? Like it doesn't always look like
Yeah, and
the worst case scenario, the
yeah,
kid
and
being beaten because of that.
yeah, sure. And I think we're saying the same thing in different ways. I am more saying, right, like somebody thinking that when they see the paper say 50 out of 100, they'll have a heart
Yeah.
attack and die, right? Which is it's probably doesn't happen a lot, right? So it's like going back to the not that there aren't scary ramifications of things that could happen as a result of the stimulus itself of failing that test. It's more like, we tend to catastrophize, and there I guess what I'm saying is when that catastrophization is grounded in reality towards like really bad things are going to happen, or I feel as though I have justification for saying that, then that is 100% valid. And yeah, we got to we got to help people get through that situation or find the help that they need. Maybe an exam is the wrong example, but sort of just again, we tend to like our brains, given the fact that, right, it's a threat detection system, our brains are sitting there trying to equate everything with the threat of death. When in reality, a lot of the things that we worry about, even though they could have unintended consequences or ramifications, they're rarely death
Sure,
itself.
sure.
And in the places where they are or on that wavelength, yeah, like we got to help as much as
So,
we can.
so thank you for clarifying. And I should do just the same. I should clarify that it's not I'm not looking at it from the perspective of, well, the lion example, a lot of people use the bear and being in a scenario where that would be relevant or something of that caliber. I'm saying that the existence of anxiety is our or the existence of those anxious thoughts that it might be the end of my life or the end of my career or something that we're catastrophizing is actually our ego feels like it might die, if that makes sense.
I love that. I love that. And that is right. Like, I think you're right. I guess I'm just where we're disconnecting is I'm saying physical,
Yeah.
and that ego piece, right, is like it's totally valid, but that is um tends to be more emotional,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Which is what I'm
But
saying
yeah,
is that it should be validated just the same. Instead of us saying, "Hey, well, this is just an irrational thought. Let me ground that into something that I think is more digestible for me in the social situation that I am." I would say I will take the extremeness of this thought and analyze that. Where is that coming from? Why do I feel that in danger? It's not. It's there is a implementation of a trigger that we may not even remember, maybe in our subconscious. It may be something that we didn't even experience because trauma is passed down through generations. So you might just have a socially anxious person that comes from a family of socially anxious people, not really knowing, this is why I'm having these types of thoughts. But I hope that that clarifies. It's okay. We can move on if not. But I just want to say that everything is valid. And if somebody is thinking, um, this might cause death then there's a substantial reason there. I think that if people maybe dismiss the extremeness of it, then they miss the core of the reason.
yeah. I like I said, I think we are both saying helpful, like
Sure.
important things in slightly different ways. And like to end on a high note, I do think, right, like anxiety can be a guide towards something, maybe growth, maybe change, whatever, right? And so maybe not all the time, but certainly a lot of times, I think it's very fruitful and helpful to be like, to be curious, to your point of saying, hey, this anxiety is coming on in this situation, even whether it makes sense to me or not. I need to probe a little bit and be like, what, why? That curiosity of why is it coming up in this situation? And maybe, through therapy, introspection, whatever it may be, we start to peel the layers of the onion back a little bit and get to more of a root or a
Yeah,
source, if you
certainly,
will.
certainly. Okay, so let's talk a bit about that then. So, um, has therapy been something that you've leaned into? Do you have experiences in therapy?
I did go to therapy when I was in college. I think I said earlier, right? I was really trying to figure this out. I was 18 years old, sort of lost, didn't know how to handle any of the things that I was dealing with. Um, I will say that the story, like, I probably won't tell the full story. It will maybe make it into a next book if I write it. I'm still trying to hash that all out. I went to therapy for, I'd say, probably like 6 months. I think one of the challenges that I had, right, was like I wanted to see my life improve. And I just kind of felt as though the therapist, and this was one of the challenges of like when you're young, right, and I don't know, maybe I'll say myself, right? I was young, stubborn. I didn't really know all the I still don't know all the things, but I was like, hey, as a concrete example, right? Was like back then I was 21, 22 when I left therapy, and I was like, hey, that didn't work for me, and therefore therapy doesn't work, right? Whereas now, knowing more and also the conversation around mental health being larger, I think more people would be like, hey, you try out a few therapists, you see who you have a vibe with, because you're really trying to find somebody that you can confide in and trust in and work through your life with. And so for me, I was kind of just like, well, that guy didn't get it. And so I'm moving on. And I don't say that. It's certainly not a like, hey, me trying to validate my own brand or the path that I went on. I wish that I, either stuck with it longer or found somebody else, because I know that I would have moved faster had I found that. But it was the journey that I guess I was on. And so that was kind of, I just, at that time, I was like, hey, I think I'm starting to make some progress on my own. And so I'm going to keep leaning into that. And I wish that because I know that it's like, if you have more time with somebody who you really trust and you work with, like, you're going to advance. It's like just how it goes. But at the time I think I was young and stubborn to see that.
Also, I mean, being that young anyway, everybody is young and stubborn at that time, but it's not, even now, I mean, I don't think that, um, it's not easy to find a good therapist, and just, um, it's not super common that every person that starts therapy has a good experience. A lot of people don't. There's a lot of stigma around mental health and mental illness, and um, going to the going to see the shrink used to be, what people would say, and that's associated with medication. And so now the world of science has expanded, and we're really talking about therapy and other healing modalities, but it's not easy to find a good therapist. Just like it's not easy to find the right group of friends and the right romantic partner, and they're all relationships. So if you find a therapist and you don't click with them, you don't vibe with them, or you don't feel like, I don't know, they're knowledgeable enough in general or about your problem, or they don't really care, or they're money hungry, or whatever it is, that is part of the relationship. That is part of the healing process, is to choose the right person. So that's therapy too, to choose the right provider, practitioner, because um, the way I think that people should approach therapy, and I think once somebody has found enough healing through therapy or other methods, they realize that a therapist or somebody of that sort is simply a guide, and you're doing the healing on your own. But yes, it has to be self motivated. You have to choose to go to therapy. And if you don't, and you're in a situation where you have to go to therapy, it's really hard to find healing that way. Not to say that you can't, but if it's court ordered or somebody's threatening to leave you or something like that, it's not like a therapeutic environment. It's like I have to figure this out. Which has its place as well. But I've gone to therapy throughout the years and have found a lot of terrible therapists. It's just the truth of it. Like, being a therapist doesn't mean that ever, like, we're all just human beings. I've gone to doctors that are not great. I had other providers just kind of miss the mark for me as well. And I just thank you for sharing that. It does mean that it'll take a little bit longer, but it also is creating that the right perspective is, don't give your power to just somebody else. You can heal yourself. This is not the only way to heal, but it might take an investment, some time to find the right person and the right method to get all of that down. So to be patient and give yourself that space. Yeah.
Most definitely. And I guess if I could just add, right, is part of my brand itself is sort of an experimentation sort of vibe. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's like understanding that there are a lot of different healing modalities available to us. Not all of them resonate with everybody, right? So it's like somebody may, and I don't talk about medication because it's just like I'm not trained in that, and I don't want it. Like I will say, hey, have a conversation with
Mhm.
your doctor, right? Or read some research on your own and see what you think of it. Um, but when somebody comes to me and asks me about a certain topic, I'm like, hey, I can give you my opinion in saying that that has, or my experience in saying that that has worked for me. I can't necessarily guarantee that it will work for you, right? For me, like one thing that has always been so helpful is some sort of exercise plan, and like running is how I get out of my own head. And it's just sort of a meditative experience for me, even though it's challenging to get out there and run and exert yourself and whatnot. But so my my pitch to the listener is basically like I'm not trying to make it sound overly burdensome, and I'm not trying to put too much on your plate, but just I guess right as you're going through the process of being like, hey, I worked with a couple therapists that worked for me or that didn't work for me, remain open to the different possibilities that are out there because you never know what one is going to hit you the most and the most impactful. Sometimes they come from places that we didn't imagine or expect. And also, right, like the general theory of, sometimes we may say like, hey, just do this and you'll be fine, or take this one avenue and you'll be good. My theory is like, why not take all the things that help us and package them up and get as much of the relief as we
Yeah,
can, you
yeah.
know?
And in order to do that, it really does take the time and trying and failing, having the experience of failure. Unfortunately, it sucks, but it's imperative. It's an important part of life to experience failure. So try again. And I think that because I've found so much healing, I've found a lot of healing for talk therapy and EMDR therapy as well. I'm grateful that I stuck with it to heal my trauma because, yeah, I've had a lot of bad experiences. And recently, too, it's just, we're not perfect. We're human beings that are operating in a professional space. And sometimes there's some lines that are crossed, and sometimes we unknowingly um, cross those lines. Um, it's within our subconscious. We don't realize that's how we're interacting in a relationship. It's just another example of a relationship, but that the term of that, by the way, is countertransference. When it comes from the client, when the client or the person seeking therapy is kind of acting unknowingly, it's within their subconscious. It's called transference. So we're having these interactions where we're actually expressing our traumas in some ways, hopefully in a safe manner. But the importance behind having a relationship with a therapist, having a um, therapy sessions is what I should say. Therapy sessions with a therapist is that you're able to um, maybe experience a panic attack or a depressive episode and have somebody that is as unbiased as possible share their experience with that and their clinical knowledge on how to heal that. I think that's just a very healing relationship. It's to have somebody that's knowledgeable about it, that can sit in that space with you and not judge you.
For sure. Yeah, and we all need that to a degree, right? Whether it's through a parent, a sibling, a loved one, a significant other, whatever, right? Just to have somebody, and there's obviously different settings of professional or you know, just your family, whatever it is. Sorry, your interpersonal relationships, right? It's like to have somebody sit there with you and just like be there with you, and whether they say anything or not, just kind of accepting what you're going through and trying to be that voice or be that guiding light to be like, I don't know what you need. I'm not even going to tell you, but hey, I'm here for you, right? And you let me know if you need anything. So that is really that's a great thing that I think we all need
For
to a
sure.
degree.
It's what human beings need. Yes, that's very true. Like it's what makes us healthy. Full human beings is having a sense of community. And you should feel that with your therapist. If you don't at some point, then find a different therapist, please. Don't just tolerate being uncomfortable um with somebody that you don't connect. Don't just give your healing journey over to somebody else and let them run the show. You being in control of that. And so the perspective on mental health and mental illness in the West and healing that is very different than all of the other countries. And so I think that in what I was trying to convey earlier is that it's it's important to find spaces where you're not being overly criticized or being overly critical of yourself as well when you're experiencing things that are as natural as anxiety and depression. A lot of people experience depression when the seasons change. It's called SADS, the seasonal affective disorder. It's our bodies reacting to our environment. I mean, we're part of nature. Our minds and our bodies aren't separated. And so when you're making a recommendation of exercising, you're benefiting your brain health. When you're exercising, it's not just your body. Just like when you shared breathing as a first step, I teach that to my clients as well. Like I teach breathing in a box because that relates to your heart rate variability. So you're connecting with that system in your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system. You're activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is calming your body down. It's telling you, hey, this is not, we don't need these resources in this way right now. We can instead change our focus over to how do I think about this logic? Yeah, how do I navigate this situation that has triggered me? Yeah. Um, so yeah, I hope that I conveyed that there is there's just a space for all of those experiences for anxiety, depression. It's part of our natural human expression. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. And to folks who are listening, right? It's like know that that is out there and like not to stop looking for it, right? Kind of to what you said earlier is if you haven't found it yet, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Um, Not saying it's going to be easy, right? It's like uh, to another point of like sort of nuance, right? Is like therapy can be expensive, it can be inaccessible, and so for a lot of folks, like it's going to be challenging. At the same time, um, there are resources out there, and I hope that folks don't lose hope along the way because eventually you can find what it is that may ultimately help.
Certainly, and just to speak to my audience, today is National Suicide Prevention Day. I'm glad that we're bringing some more awareness to mental health in general and kind of giving these days some spotlight. But there are hotlines and text messaging lines that you can contact if you're ever experiencing any suicidal thoughts, um, creating a plan or anything like that, because that's generally what people that suffer from severe depression, severe clinical depression, might experience, having those suicidal thoughts. I have connection with suicide. I've had a guest on my show talk about her experiences, but in my personal life, I've had somebody complete suicide as well. And it's oh, it just tears me up to talk about it, but it's I think that our mental health system fails people in a lot of ways by, I think the way that we're targeting this, um, anxiety and depression and just the common disorders that we see is not it's not the right way. It's through medication, and it's not really looking at the human composition. We need community. We need to feel safe. We need our needs to be met, in order to heal from these things. And I think that there's a lot of backlash on professionals just because we have pursued it that way, because we've said, "Oh, just take this pill. It's fine. It's fine. Just take this and you'll heal." And instead of teaching people about this is how your brain will react if you've had these certain experiences. You've had trauma, your brain's going to be wired to experience trauma, and you might get yourself into relationships that you were unknowingly getting into that are triggering you in these same ways. What is that all about? Let's teach people about their psychology, about our makeup, and how we can heal ourselves, because it's not just let's take nothing in life is just take a pill and it's fine. Yeah.
For sure. And I'm very sorry to hear about the person you lost on suicide. It's it's an awful thing. Obviously it's a really important day today, with it being National Suicide Awareness Day. And yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to everybody who is afflicted or connected to situations like that. It's definitely heartbreaking.
And it's just, what I wanna say about it is that there is help, if it's a therapist that you either can't afford or you haven't found somebody that you can connect with, there's just so many other things that you can do. And hopefully you have somebody in your life that you feel safe enough to share that with, because that really is what makes the difference, is sharing the load with somebody. Yeah.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
Okay, Ryan. Well, I have a final question, but before I move on to that, is there any questions or anything else that you want to share yeah, share with my anything at all that you want to share with my audience?
Good question. Obviously I have
Yeah.
the floor, I have the mic. Um, so you had outlined a question in your email that I think would be helpful to talk about. I don't know what your final question will be.
I think I know what you're
Will
talking
it
about.
be
Yeah,
your
the fifth one is my final question. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we just quickly touch on the other question, because it actually relates to what we were just talking about, right? So the question was in the realm of, like, sort of, what do you think, like, the industry, the mental health industry, and clinicians today, what do where do you think the shortcomings are? Why do you think it doesn't always work for folks like who are a part of going through therapy and just the system that we have developed, right? Um, and it I know I just said it, but the reason I want to talk about it, because you had just mentioned, like, it's not always about take a pill. There's so many other different avenues. Like, I want to highlight that because I think it's really important. And my answer to the question is something of a segue, like it's a continuation of what you were saying, right? So it's like, my philosophy, right, on medication again is, I certainly can't fill a prescription. So it's not my business to say, hey, take this or don't take that. But again, going back to the sort of experimentation slash thought process around, like, getting as much healing as you can, I would encourage folks, right? It's like, even if you work with your doctor and they say, hey, I think the best path forward is medication, I would encourage those folks not to just close off all other paths after that, right? Because one of the difficulties is, like, medication can be amazing. I know a lot of people who have benefited tremendously from it. So you're not going to hear anything bad from me. Um, at the same time, it does not, like, the numbers bear out that, like, it does not work for everyone, right? So to think that every single person is going to benefit 100% from it, like, the numbers don't quite show that. But even if it does benefit you, right? Um, we still need to there's a lot of different things, like, we sort of need to continue to do the work within ourselves, right? It's like, okay, so if we take some sort of SSRI or antidepressant or whatever it is, and that helps our brain chemistry, we still, right? So maybe the neurochemicals neurotransmitters are not firing in the same fashion that they were previously, that doesn't mean that we are completely immune to anxiety, completely immune to depression, right? You look at something like cognitive behavioral therapy, which basically says, how you think affects how you feel, and how you feel affects how you act, and so on and so forth, in something of a cycle. And so it's like, even if you are on medication, you're not immune to the CBT process, right? So we still need to do that inner work to be like, hey, even if it's just light education of saying, hey, I'm learning that my thoughts actually impact how I feel in a tremendous fashion. And I want to make sure that even though I'm getting benefit from medication, or if that's the case, right, is I still want to benefit as much as I can in all other avenues. So, the CBT example is just one, but it's basically me saying, like, there are still ample alternative therapies or healing modalities available to us. And I would challenge us not to cut ourselves off from them just because we have found one thing that has worked. Like, obviously, we got to figure out where the line is around like how much work we're going to do. But I think there are a lot of other great ideas out there, right? Where it's like, hey, if you go for a walk a 30-minute walk every day, if you're able to do that, that is something that, like, sure, it requires work, but it's not like we have to go to college and get a new degree. There are things that, like, we can get a lot of bang for our buck, if you will. So I do think that that is really important. Speaking more specifically to like where does maybe the profession have its shortcomings at the moment? I think I guess I would say two quick things. One is, sometimes, this is more an industry as a whole, not on a therapist level, right? You get into the therapist's office, and like I would hope that if they are, well trained, they're gonna recognize you and um, just kind of be present with you, and be accepting of what you are experiencing and what you are feeling, right? But in general, sort of like the self-help industry, and I know that's not quite medicine, but right, just general, when you're like, hey, we're trying to better ourselves, right? Sometimes that space can come with the ethos of like, hey, you are broken, right? And I want people to know that, like, hey, you may have your challenges, but like, we all do. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're all inherently broken. And when we are holding on to this narrative that we are broken, it's not a great place to start out, right? Because then we're telling ourselves negative things about ourselves and feeling worse as a result, kind of, citing that CBT process a minute ago. And I guess the last thing just to touch upon real quick is like, let's be honest, right? Even if you can get access to a therapist, which can be amazing, most likely it's a 48 to 50-minute session once a week. Maybe you do it for a few months, maybe it's in perpetuity, but it's probably not the sheer amount of time that most folks need in order to deal 100% with everything that they are dealing with, right? So that, it's possible that the therapist says, hey, you have some homework, and therefore, like, the extra time that is required comes from that homework. But also, right, is like, I guess a lot of therapists would say is, if you just go to therapy for the 48 minutes and then you come back and you haven't done anything else, like, you're probably not going to make the progress that you want to. So some of it is, I guess where I'm going with this is, there just isn't enough time, right? Like, it would be awesome if the therapist could sit down with all of us for 8 hours a week, but there's just not enough time for that, right? So I think what I'm getting at is, again, going back to the alternative avenues, if you will, is saying, hey, yeah, therapy can be amazing, and your therapist may even give you homework. On top of that, to the degree that you feel comfortable, you should still feel as though you can seek out those other, therapies that are available to you. And I use the term therapies very loosely, as in, like, that could be exercising, doing yoga, deep breathing, meditating. Doesn't need to be a formal thing. So yeah, that's kind of where my
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'll just speak on each of those things that you shared because it's important. And I complained a little bit about the mental health industry prior, but I didn't ask this question specifically out loud. So I'm glad that you are coming from that perspective that it's not a one size fits all kind of perspective. It's not like a pill is not going to fix everything. And to not convey that message anymore because it was never the case. It was never the case that you could just go and get, oh, I have anxiety, I'll just take this and then everything is fine. It's like, well, where's the anxiety coming from? Did anybody educate you about like why this is happening? Did anybody complete a clinical interview to find out, is there a family history of people having anxiety? Is there something that happened in your family, like more often than not? And that's really how you would target a problem. I mean, like in general, if you found if there was a leak happening under your sink and you're seeing a puddle of water, yeah, you can clean up the water. That's great. But then, like, did you fix the leak? What happened? What is the leak is still there. This is just going to keep happening. You have to be educated on that whole picture. And yeah, mental health professionals, and people that work in medicine as well. So they're doctors, primary care physicians generally are able to prescribe SSRIs and other psychotropic drugs. But I think that um, more so from the perspective of mental health professionals, it's just that we're kind of all trying to fit in the same model. And really, what I think makes a therapist a good therapist is by finding the model that fits your personality and the way that you've healed. Because, and then you just kind of turn into a salesman. Even if you believe in the modality, it's like, if you're not being truly authentic, how are you connecting with people? How are you really finding that healing? So that's imperative to me. I'll never tell my clients that, hey, I'm just gonna like give you these instructions and then everything is fine. Like there is nuance. There are so many ways to healing. There's not just one. It has to come from all of those avenues. Like it can't just be that, like you were saying, going to see your therapist for 48 or 50 minutes a week. I would never just recommend that. I've never, I don't think, ever had a session that short ever in my lifetime, because I don't believe that that's enough time for myself personally, but also as a therapist. I don't offer that. I offer at least 90 minutes because it's imperative to really look at the problem, see what the problem is, because you might make some recommendations on something that you think is the problem. And then you'll learn, in a month or two that was just like an aspect of the problem. The real problem was on down the road. You need more time to do that. However, I don't think that, I think it would be problematic to get too much time. I've had that experience too, because it kind of fosters the relationship of, I need this practitioner to heal. We're guides. We can help you. But you coming to therapy means that you have tried a lot of other methods before you came to therapy. And that some of those have worked, meaning you're in control of your healing. You've already started your healing process by attending those. So if you're seeking a therapist, just allow them to join that process, but don't just give the power to them to say, hey, I want you to fix me. Because it just doesn't happen that way. A pill is not going to fix it. We need more avenues. And then finally, I want to say that as far as the healing modalities go, I have chosen to pursue EMDR. EMDR, everybody, stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. It's a therapy that was really developed for veterans, but it's now generalized to trauma, um, through addiction, through sleep disorders, and all of the expressions of trauma. So that fits me because I've experienced a lot of trauma and I see mental illness through the lens of trauma. That's why I'm on that path and why that's authentic for me. But additionally, as a talk therapist, I'm a narrative therapist, and narrative therapy is a more postmodern therapy. I think it's only been around for a few decades, but it's really shifting the focus of, you're broken. This is the problem. Let's focus on the problem, to let's listen to what what you're experiencing. Let me tease apart what the problem is, but let's also realize the problem is not you. It's what you're experiencing. Let's shift the focus to, the problem is here, creating all of these problems in your life, but don't identify as the problem. And through stories, through our narrative, we can tease apart where those problematic thinking patterns are, the maladaptive behaviors. We can look at it through the narrative and then change the story for ourselves. that is more empowering and more true and authentic. But it's not my intention is not to focus on the problem because it just really does the same, just does the opposite. It produces more of the same. Focusing on the problem does that. That's what when in talking about anxiety, if we talk about anxiety too much, we're just going to produce more anxiety. And vice versa with depression. We can't just focus on these concepts as yeah, like they're end all be all. They're experiences. Let's look at the experience. I'm experiencing depression, but I'm not depression. Yeah, like we have to separate the two. And so thank you for sharing, the issues that you've found in the mental health industry because it's the same issues I've found and where I think we need to really make some improvements.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna ask my final question, if you're ready. Yeah. So the name of my show is Freedom to Fight, and I gave you some history around what that means and what that means to me. But I'm curious, what does freedom mean to you?
Yeah, so my definition or my answer it won't be that far off from the traditional answer, but there is a nuance that I think will I hope will resonate with some folks, right? So freedom, I would say, is the ability to do what you want to do when you want to do it. In the context of freedom to fight, right? It's the ability to fight the battle that you want to fight. Let's say it's like, hey, I want to resolve homelessness in my town, or I want to start like a recycling program, like whatever that challenge is that you have discovered for yourself. The freedom there would be like the ability to have the time and the wherewithal to advance it and to fight for it coming to fruition. Um, at the same time, even though I say, it's the ability to have the time and wherewithal to do what you want to do, it is not having endless time and having no responsibility. And the reason why I say that is from personal experience, and I have definitely heard this theme play out. I read a lot of books and I listen to a bunch of podcasts. A lot of times, right, is like our brains are problem solving machines. And sometimes they are trained to look for problems. And unfortunately, if you are completely free and you have a totally open schedule and nothing to do, your mind can create problems of its own, right? And all of a sudden, you may find yourself, grappling with existential questions, wondering what the meaning of life is and all that. So it's a balance between having that time to being it to be able to go do what you want to do and fight the fight that you want to fight. But at the same time, like that fight piece is so critical because that becomes your quote unquote problem, right? In a good way, where your brain is like, we are going to solve this thing. We're going to fight this battle and we're going to win it. When you lose sight of some sort of meaningful battle, your mind sometimes makes up its own challenges, and those can be really weird and really difficult ones to deal with. So, again, it's having the time and ability to fight the fight that you want to fight, but really making sure that that fight piece comes into it. Because once we lose sight of meaning and purpose and all that, we start asking ourselves terrible questions of what is the meaning of life? What is my purpose? And we need to reinfuse that so that way the freedom part that seems so great doesn't take us down.
Sure. That's an excellent answer. Yeah, I think that I was thinking it as you were talking about it, that it's not um, just a freedom to have everything you want, just all the time in the world, because we're human beings. I think what you were conveying is just like that's part of our makeup. We're designed to have purpose in life, and so when we don't have those responsibilities, we might use our systems in a maladaptive way. It might be because I really can't say it's not good to think of the meaning of life because it really is. I mean, that's where your mind goes, and you want to expand and like really find another identification with yourself. Then yeah, pursue that. But I think the essence of what you're saying is that we need to make sure that we're not that we give ourselves enough freedom to express ourselves, but to also control that because of our makeup, what we need and what we can fall into when we don't have those responsibilities, when we don't have that structure, when we don't have those guidelines, then it can turn to mental illness for sure.
Definitely. And if I like cherry on top for me, I guess, right, is we talked about like we kind of hinted at it throughout the conversation, which is, sometimes there's a just like CBT, there's a bunch of different kinds of therapies and there's acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the takeaways from ACT is basically asking yourself the question, is this helpful? Is this thought helpful? Is the process in my mind that I'm running helpful? And so to both of our points, right, of like, wondering what the meaning of life is, there is a way to do that unhelpfully. There is a way to do that helpfully. And if you go long enough where you're like, hey, this is not helping me, then we got to build that muscle to be like, once we detect that this is not helpful, we got to move on to some other act.
And that's imperative. Like, really, to be the director of your own life, like to be the manager. Let me reevaluate this. Is this actually effective? Is this really helping me? If it's not, get rid of it. Get rid of it quickly. And also, be gentle with yourself in doing that because we create attachments based on how we're childhood. So if we're, I don't know, engaging in substances or things like that in a maladaptive way. I'm not dissing substances as a whole, but I mean that just may be expressed in that way. You may have an unhealthy relation attachment of substances or with people, with food, with anything. Uh, um. So yeah, thank you for your answers, and thank you for coming on my show. And it's been really lovely talking to you.
For sure. Thank you for having me. It's nice to brainstorm on different ideas and try to provide some helpful things to folks. I hope that they are able to take a few things away that can help them. So
I think they did take a great deal away. Yes, and your book series, Get Out of Your Head. I'll put all of the links to your website and how to find you through the description. And yeah, I can't wait to share this with everybody.